Before we dive in, here's another show you can enjoy in the True Story FM family of entertainment podcasts.
Ever wonder where the devil got his horns?
How about those cloven hooves?
Or that pitchfork?
Wasn't he an angel?
No, he was a snake.
No, he's the great red dragon.
No, he's the beast.
He's the prince of this world.
Prince of darkness.
Well, he's the prince of dark.
Good morning, star lovelies. One of my names is Lester Ryan Clark.
And I sometimes go by Keenan Diaz.
And we're the hosts of the brand new podcast, The Devil's Details. What comes to mind when I say Lucifer?
How about Satan?
What about just the devil? How did the big bad of the Western world end up with so many faces? Join us as we dig up, decipher, and deconstruct the devil's many forms throughout history.
Take a guided tour with Dante through the 9 circles of hell.
Or revisit Satan's angsty bad boy years in Paradise Lost.
Learn the ins and outs of a Faustian contract.
Easier than a 1099, but with a hell of a lot more fine print.
Slither on over to The Devil's Details on True Story FM and join us in the diabolic discussion.
Love and hisses. Mwah! Didn't Al Pacino play him in a movie?
Are you sure that wasn't Robert De
I could
Niro?
have sworn it was Tim Curry.
That was Elizabeth
Didn't
Hurley.
he go down to Georgia at some point?
Hey, psst. Hey, you see that Snickers over there? If no one's looking, you should just take it.
No! Don't listen to him, my son. That would be stealing, and stealing is a sin.
Sin Schmin, it's a freaking Snickers bar. You deserve to have it. Sinning really satisfies you.
Repent, my child. Virtue is the only real snack worth savoring. For that candy bar is merely a gateway to nougat damnation. Has this ever happened to you?
Listening to the devil on one shoulder and an angel on the other, and you're not sure what to think?
Then we're here to help. I'm Pete Wright.
And I'm Tommy Metz III, and this season on All the Feelings, we're examining the 7 deadly sins.
You know, the fun ones.
And the 7 heavenly virtues.
Which are also a thing. Through personal stories, historical oddities, and way too much embarrassment, we take you on a thrilling journey through all the goods and the bads you hear about in church.
But without all that pesky church stuff. So come join us for All the Feelings Season 9, a sometimes funny podcast about being human. All the sins, all the virtues.
All in one place. Go to allthefeelings.fun to learn more, or subscribe to All the Feelings wherever you get your podcasts.
Game over.
Hello and welcome to this episode of the Superhero Ethics Podcast. Today we're discussing the movie Thunderbolts. We're discussing the new Avengers. We're discussing what does it mean when your supervillain just needs a big hug, and how is mental illness portrayed in Thunderbolts and a lot of other superhero media. And we're doing that with myself, Riki Hayashi, and returning regular guest, Jessica Plummer. Jessica, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing good. How are you doing?
Pretty well. We are 2 months out till baby arrives. So, our young Padawan, our young hero coming soon. So we're in the midst of crib making and basically all the IKEA projects from hell, except they're much smaller because they're for a baby. And I do want to say a quick word on that, which is that I'm really excited to keep bringing you episodes of both this and the Star Wars podcast. There's actually a third podcast that's going to be starting soon, focused on the idea of parenting with myself and 2 veteran parents, Mandy Kaplan and Pete Wright, both of the True Story family of podcasts. But I am going to be taking a hiatus for a while because there's a lot to do to get ready. There's a lot of cooking we want to do. There's a lot of getting the house ready we want to do. And it's just a lot to try and take on while also trying to not only record an episode a week, or multiple episodes a week, but also edit them and all that kind of stuff. So this will probably be the last episode we put out for a while. The hiatus is going to be through June and July, possibly into August. Baby comes middle to late July, and we will kind of see where things are. But by August, or if nothing else, September, we will return, hit the ground running. So please stay subscribed, please stay liked and all that. And of course, please sending us feedback on stuff that comes out over the summer that you want us to talk about. If nothing else, there's a movie about some fantastic people. Is it 3 people? Is it 5 people?
It's somewhere in that range.
Fantastic Four.
4 people. So I'm sure we're going to do that again and probably get Jessica back for that. But today we are talking about Thunderbolts. And just to make sure you feel okay.
Officially, that it's Thunderbolts asterisk.
Thunderbolts
Yeah,
asterisk.
how do you pronounce that? Thunderbolts.
Because asterisk, the name has changed, and we're going to be spoiling some things from the movie, to be clear. But also, if you haven't seen the movie, don't worry. Neither has Riki Hayashi, because we're not this isn't going to be a review of the movie as much as it's going to be a discussion of some of the topics that the movie raises. It has a lot to say about mental health. It has a lot to say about the nature of who is a hero and who gets to choose who is a hero. And that's kind of really the depth of the things we're going to talk about, because as I've mentioned in the past, I think that there are some times where superhero media can engage with mental illness and do it very well, and sometimes when it does it very badly. And so, Jessica, I'm just going to start by asking you, my first thought walking out of the movie was, did they really just tell me that a sad white boy loner who is so emo that he's hurting everyone around him just needed the pretty girl to hug him and it would make him okay?
Yes, and the question is?
I mean, is that... if I described that to you, I feel like you would normally find that fairly problematic, but I know you really like this movie, and so I want to kind of hear more about... Help me reframe that aspect of the movie in a way that doesn't make it seem quite so, let's fix the poor male loneliness epidemic by ignoring how much hurt they're causing and just giving them a big hug.
Yeah, so I did not see the movie that way at all, like that really. And when you said, because I knew before I went to see the movie, you saw it first and you told me you're on the fence about it, and I came out of it and I was like, what didn't Matthew like? And and I thought it might have to do with that. So I see where you're coming from, but that was not my interpretation of it at all. And I think for two really crucial reasons. One is that the main character of this movie is Yelena. Like it is, it's an ensemble film, but she is the protagonist. It is her story. It is her journey. It is her mental health that is being explored the most thoroughly. Literally, the opening scene is her monologuing about how depressed she is. And if it were Bob's story, then yes, I think I would agree with your reading of it. But it's not. He is a supporting character who functions to illuminate her story. The other thing that I think really saves it is that their relationship is not romantic. There is no romantic dynamic between them. I'm sure some people came out of it and wanted them to kiss, but I don't think that was the intent of the filmmakers. And it wasn't the read that I got. If it was a romantic dynamic, again, I would be like, that was kind of gross. But my takeaway from the movie was not, oh, this poor, sad white man who hurts everyone around him just needs somebody to hug him and tell him he's never done anything wrong ever in his life, but that we need each other. We need community. We need connection. And if we are depressed, we need to turn to the people in our lives and ask for help, because Bob is not the only one who needs that. Every single character in the movie needs that.
Right.
And I have specific scenes if you want me to go through them.
For sure. And I think that does help reframe it somewhat. And I think kind of gives a good, I say that kind of humorously because I've heard some of this from Jessica before, but it is something I'm a little wrestling with. But Jessica's got me somewhat more onto this understanding. But let's step back a bit and kind of set the frame of this. So, and I'm going to give kind of a summary of the movie up to these kind of crucial points without going into too much detail. So as you said, we start with Yelena, the character who was really introduced to us in the Black Widow movie as Natasha's sister, and who also really came into her own in the Hawkeye series, a series that is not great, but introduced two of my favorite female characters right now, her and Echo, which I think is really awesome.
Love for Kate Bishop.
I think Kate Bishop's fine. I think Kate Bishop is a character I've seen a bunch of times before, and that we also haven't really seen much from since then. But so anyway, like Yelena is depressed. She's working as an assassin on behalf of the Countess. What is her actual name?
Val. Just call her Val.
Yeah.
She has four names.
Elaine. It's
We're
Elaine.
Gonna call her Val. We're gonna call her. She's played by Julia Louis-Dreyfus, also known as Veep, also known as Elaine from Seinfeld, also known as the woman who dances really badly in a really funny way in a great episode of that show that is really horrible, actually, a show. But anyway, but it has some great moments. And I say that as a New York Jew. There's a lot of complications around that show. Anyway, moving on. And she's doing these tasks, and she's not really thinking about the morality of them. She's kind of thinking about how she shouldn't be thinking about that. And she wants to just kind of lose herself, and that she doesn't really feel any purpose because she doesn't feel like she's making the world better. She just feels like she's doing these things on behalf of someone else. And we intersperse that with people are starting to do congressional hearings about what Val is up to, including a new congressman from, I guess, New York, because that's where I think he's from. Bucky
Brooklyn.
Barnes.
They specifically say the freshman congressman from Brooklyn. And can I just say, as somebody who hasn't seen an MCU movie in a while, I felt like I had been in a coma for several years. I was like, Bucky's in Congress? I felt like I had been snapped, like in the MCU. Snapped. I was like, what is happening? It was, I can't.
I had a similar
get
feeling.
My head around it.
I've seen some of the recent MCU stuff. I've not seen all of it. I had a similar feeling. But anyway, and it turns out that all the other people who are part of the what will become the Thunderbolts have all been working for Val. They're all sent to this secret hideout place that she keeps somewhere in the American desert, I guess in the Southwest. I'm not really sure. But it's supposed to incinerate ridiculous action hijinks. And can the group work together? Yes, the group can work together. And they all survive. But they're all now being hunted by Val. And okay, no, they don't all survive. That is correct. Who
saw the movie here?
I saw it a couple of weeks ago, and I didn't have the best experience seeing it. One of them, Taskmaster, who I guess is a character they never really figured out what to do with, just flat up dies.
They changed the story. Like, she was supposed to have a larger part, and they changed it.
Oh, was she?
Yeah.
I thought it was I figured it was a fake out. Like, they wanted us to think she was going to have a bigger part, and then they were like, just kidding.
I think in the original script, and I believe that they filmed some of this, there was supposed to be more of like a friendship between Taskmaster and Ghost because they share like similar backgrounds of being used by a government agency. And so that was supposed to be like their connection. And they decided to change it up and have there be an early death of consequence, and it ended up being her, and it's unfortunate, but
okay. Yeah, I kind of wished we'd had something more from her, but it, I guess it sets, look, there are stakes.
Yeah.
So they all escape, and they wind up finding this guy named Bob along the way, who doesn't really know what's going on with him, but he has some powers, maybe, possibly, and really all that Val wants is to get her hands back on him, because he apparently is this secret project that she's been working on. Lots of other people have died attempting to make what they have made in Bob. And we get to a situation where Bob feels like he's been abandoned by the group, and Val is the one person who can talk to him, and she kind of convinces him to become this hero that she describes as Sentry, which I've now come to understand is Sentrey, or however you pronounce Sentry. I thought it was Mr. Sentry, like the 20th century.
I think they were hitting. I think it was a fake out because I thought they were saying century, like 100 years, every time they mention the project, because they talk about the Sentry project a lot during the movie, well before Bob is like, puts on the Sentry costume and is revealed to be Sentry, and they don't give us his last name or anything for a really long time. So I'm like vaguely familiar with the character from the comics, but it took me, I think, until he not quite put on the costume, but pretty close to that for me to be like, oh, they're saying Sentry. So I do think that they were futzing it in their pronunciation. They were
playing with that wordplay a little bit.
I think they might have been doing that on purpose.
Okay.
Or I just can't hear, which is also a true statement.
Well, so let's talk about who is this character in the comics, because he is similar, but I think fairly distinct in ways that, particularly from mental illness perspectives, are very important to name. So who is he? Who is Sentry/emo boy? Who I think is actually supposed to be. He has a character, the name of the Void. Who is he in the comics?
Shall
Riki,
I go?
This is all you. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, Sentry is basically a Marvel Superman, which, there are dozens of Supermen in all of the comics now, but he's got the flight, he's got the invulnerability. I believe originally it's not supposed to be a super serum, which is what they used in the movie, right? To give him his powers, like it's a government super soldier program. I think it's supposed to be magic, but that's something that's not important, and they've probably changed it multiple times. The important thing is that in the comics, originally he suffers from a dissociated personality disorder.
Right.
So like Sentry and Void are different aspects of his personality. I do believe that like at times they do have strong relationships to his depression, bringing some of this aspect out. And when he was introduced in the Marvel comics, it was actually originally like a story similar to Spider-Man No Way Home, the most recent one. And I think that's why they didn't go with that story, because it was too similar, where the Illuminati, Doctor Strange, Iron Man, etc., used like a Doctor Strange spell to make the world forget about Sentry and the Void. As a consequence, like Bob Reynolds also forgets, and he has these dreams, these vivid dreams where he's like, I had a dream that I was flying, I had a dream that I was a hero.
Right.
Well, they're memories that are actually manifesting. And so like there's this journey of him rediscovering himself as Sentry, and then unfortunately rediscovering the Void. And
I can see why that would get really confusing, especially not only because of Spider-Man No Way Home, but also that sounds remarkably similar to some of the ideas explored in Moon Knight, which is another character who has dissociative identity disorder, which, for those who are not aware, is what was once known as multiple personality disorder. We have a better understanding of it now scientifically. I think that change happened about 10 years ago, but just for anyone who's not quite understanding exactly what we're talking about, and there again, we have a character who has that and is having dreams about things that his other personalities have done at some point in time, or that he has done at another point in time.
Yeah, and they're again, like, comics are always changing things, retcon, now it's this, now it's that. And there was also a period of time where the Void was like a demonic entity that possessed him.
Right. And in this, I think it's much more that he becomes kind of what I described as emo Dr. Manhattan, in that he has like all that kind of like power that Dr. Manhattan has from the Watchmen to just kind of like snap people out of existence, not like Thanos snap, but just kind of like with a thought they stop existing, and he is very depressed, very he wanted to stand up to the heroes, but he wanted them not to fight. He wanted them to kind of recognize how great he is. And he has this kind of like super happy, like everything is great. And then when they fight him and he realizes that not only are they against him, but also that Val was using him and lying to him, he has what I think a lot of us can recognize as a depressive crash. And the words are never spoken, but I think this is, and Jessica, let me know where you would put it. I mean, I'm not a trained therapist. I don't think you are either. But it feels like it is much more evocative in this of bipolar, manic depressive, things like that, or certainly at least deep depression, than it is DID.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly have no medical or therapeutic qualifications whatsoever. What I will say is that depression is something that pretty much every main character in this movie is shown to have in common. Yelena, Bob, Walker. I think you can definitely argue that Alexi and Bucky are shown, like, there's definitely a moment of Bucky like standing in his kitchen, just like not processing being in the world. The only major character I would say we don't necessarily see it for is Ghost, but it's an easy extrapolation to make. But with most of those characters, I would say, okay, what they've got going on is depression. And some of them also we know have PTSD, but they're managing it. Like Bucky probably has more than just depression going on. But Bob clearly has additional mental health struggles, including, like explicitly stated in the movie, problems with addiction. On top of the depression that is sort of the baseline for every character in this film.
Right. Riki,
you say they all have depression, but they also have, like, depression is just not a one size fits all. They have differing degrees of how they are coping with it and how they are managing it, right? Like different levels of functionality.
Absolutely. And like I would say, like for example, like I mentioned, like Bucky is masking really, really well.
Right.
And I think you can definitely draw a narrative of like Bucky is doing what he's supposed to do, and he's being a normal person, and he's, you know, doing good without violence. He's in Congress now. And like that moment when he just like throws it all away to go, you know, do insane things on a motorcycle, like kind of reveals how much he has been masking who he really is, where Alexi is also masking but much more poorly. Like his show of everything is great and I'm fine is much more transparent. Yelena's not bothering. Walker is awesome. I think it's actually really interesting that all of the men are masking and only Yelena is like, this is it, this is how I feel.
Right. No, I think that's very true. And I think, you know, Alexi is shown not quite as what could possibly be addiction, but I think he is better understood as self-medicating. You know, he is using alcohol and food, and he might well be addicted to those things, but certainly right now, he is self-medicating. He is using them to give himself the dopamine that his brain is not producing, which makes me, I think part of why this is such a, depression is a word that is used so broadly. And as I said, I'm not a licensed therapist. I did have some of that training, and I want to kind of give a little bit of a breakdown as it was explained to me by both professors and my own therapists, of just some of the different terms we can use, that there is, because I think people often hear the word depressed and don't know what it means, and that there is situational depression, which is a bad thing has happened to you, and you are feeling really down about it, but presumably you will get back up. And that is often what the analogy that was used for me was you're in a hole and there's a ladder and you just haven't figured out, you're not ready to climb back up the ladder. Then there is like long-term depression, which is, you know, you are down at that hole, there may be a ladder, but you're having trouble seeing it, you need help remembering to like use the ladder, etc. And then chronic medical depression, I mean, all of them are medical to some extent, and this is where like medical intervention becomes more important, medication and things like that, which is where you're in the hole and there is no ladder, and you need to construct the ladder to some extent. And we can go into all the differences of like, you know, with therapy versus medication, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I think the movie does a really good job of showing lots of people at lots of different stages. And I don't want to say like which one is at which, but all of them are dealing with just the general fucked upness of the world in general, but also of their particular worlds. You know, all of them were people who thought they would be heroes, to some extent or another, and they are not, and they're not being treated as such, and they're not being perceived as such, and they're, in a lot of ways, really wrestling with who they are. And I do think you're right, Jessica, that a lot of what, you know, what makes them come together is the idea of community, and the idea that like each of them feels alone in their own way, and finds that in the company of each other that they're not alone, that everyone is in their own shame room, but that they don't have to be. They can be together and come out of it together.
Yeah, and well, so I do want to. There's a couple of things I want to say. One, I do want to sort of challenge how you framed, you know, the things that they're wrestling with, because I think for very few of the characters, it's actually how they're perceived that they're worrying about. Like maybe Walker and maybe Bob. Yelena does want to do more public superheroing. Oh, and Alexi, I guess. But like, that's because Alexi tells her when he was happiest, she's like, how do I be happy? And he says, I was happiest when I was a public superhero. And she's like, okay, let me try that. Like, she's not in it for the glory. And I don't think it's ego for all of the characters. And I don't think it's ego even for the characters where it is ego. I don't think that's the primary driver, because the thing that we're like, the climax has them, Bob as the Void, basically like nothings all of them into, or he's nothinging people away, which by the way, the special effects in this movie are great. Like the effects that they have for the Void, the way that they've animated him in CGI is really cool, and the way that people are erased is like genuinely frightening and very alarming.
And the sound design,
yeah,
I mean, there's just a very brief scene in the trailer, but it's almost like a thwomp as they disappear.
Yes,
into nothing.
it was, and the first time it happens, there's like a little girl that Alexi has just saved, and you're like, oh, he saved her, and then boom, she's gone. Everybody's fine at the end. Like they all come out of it. But so
that's so manipulative emotionally on the writer's part to do that.
They were, well, and that's the thing. Like a friend and I saw this together. Becky, who's been on the podcast, saw this together, and afterwards we were like breaking down the story mechanics because they're very. It's a movie that has very clear mechanics, but they work so well. But yeah, so Yelena goes into the blackness to try and talk to Bob and get him to stop this. And then the rest of them all follow her. And what happens when you're in the blackness is you're confronted with terrible moments in your life, and specifically moments when you failed or were at your lowest. Like Yelena repeatedly sees herself as a trainee in the Red Room, luring a friend, a little girl, she is a little girl, her friend is a little girl, to be murdered. And she sees this over and over and over again. And there's actually a great line when they all make it, all the other characters make it through to Yelena and Bob. And she's like, are you guys okay? And Bucky's like, well, I had a great life, so I'm doing fine. But like, they're very much plagued by the things that they've done and the things that they have not done. And I think that's important to note because, again, that question of like, is this a movie about, oh, this poor sad man, or is it a movie about supporting one another? And I think the fact that they do take responsibility for their own wrongs is really key to what side of the coin the movie lands on.
I think that's really fair. Now, first of all, I want to say just on what you're talking about there, that's I referenced a shame room, and that's the term they use at some points in the movie. And I do think, for me at least, in my own, I mean, I don't want to speak for anyone else, but my own understanding of my own depression, that felt very, very real. You know, like there was a period of time when I was trying to crawl out of depression when it was at its worst, when I started listening to podcasts, in part because I needed to always have voices talking to me, because or else, you know, not the voices in my head in a literal schizophrenic way, but just in terms of like my brain without active input would start remembering and would immediately take me back to those things. And that is something that like happens in depression. And I thought all that was brilliant. I will say I had a very different response to the special effects. I laughed out loud because I did think it was so manipulative and bad. And like, come on, how lazy is the writing here? But I'm really glad it worked for others. I think what I meant by the hero thing, and maybe actually, I'm going to say it again. I think actually you're right, and I think you've gotten me to see the hero thing in a different way. It's not that they all want to be heroes. It's that, again, in a way, they're self-medicating of they don't have the self-validation that humans need, and that they don't also have the validation of their immediate friends and family and loved ones. And as happens a lot, myself very much included, and I've had to be careful with this podcast not to be doing this, but I think Alexi especially and Walker, they're seeking it from strangers. You know, a lot of people who, you think about that person who is just seeking the cheers of the crowd while alienating all the people close to them. That's very much a depressive trait and can be linked to narcissism, but can just be depression of you're craving that validation that you don't get from yourself, and you're craving it from strangers. And it can be, you know, serial friendships, serial relationships, or trying to get 10,000 likes, because if you just get 1,000 more likes, maybe your mother will stop berating you for the thing that she berated you about 20 years ago that you can't forget, you know? And I do think that you're right, they capture that very well, and have Yelena doesn't have that the way the others do. And I think that's really interesting how that plays out.
Yeah. The other thing that you said that I was like, well, this is really relevant, is when you were likening like the different kinds of depression to being trapped in a hole, and how do you get out of the hole if there's no ladder? That's literally in the movie. Like, yeah. There is a sequence in the movie. It's when they're escaping this like death trap that Valentina has sent them all into, and there is an elevator shaft, but there's no elevator and there's no ladder. So how do they get out of it? And it's Bob actually who comes up with the idea that they all link arms and press like back to back. There's 4 of them at this point. It's Yelena, Bob, Walker, and Ghost. They link arms, they back up, and then they like walk up the walls, bracing against each other. And like the metaphor could not be any more blatant. Like, how do you get out of this? You have to lean on each other. Like it's really, extremely explicit. And this is not the first movie to use that as a metaphor for teamwork and connection and like being a better person by making friends. The Emperor's New Groove does it beautifully. And it's only when they get to the top and Walker decides he needs to be the hero, because when they get to the top, they're like, wait, now how do we get to the doorway? And Walker decides that he's gonna like do this big hero moment and he's gonna jump for the doorway, and he almost kills everybody else because he's thinking as an individual instead of how they support each other and like coming up with a collective plan. So yeah, the movie is really, really unsubtle. Like, how do you get out of the hole? You lean on each other.
But I love that. I don't know, like not everything needs to be subtle, and
No.
that
Well,
metaphor can easily be missed, right? You can just view it as a action set piece moment. But I think
well,
if
and
you
I did miss it. I didn't think about it until I was thinking about like what we were going to talk about in this discussion. And I was like, oh, dang, okay. Because it happens pretty early in the movie before the theme of depression is really expanded on, before you really see it for every character. And I was like, oh, okay. And you can compare it to, there's a scene during the climax before the little girl gets nothinged, when basically they've just fought Bob in Avengers Tower, and now they're back on the street, and he like takes out, I think, a helicopter, and it's causing all these building parts to fall down onto the street, and so they're like protecting civilians, which was a very funny scene for me to watch because I used to walk down that exact block every single day, twice a day, to go to work. And like, if you're in the MCU, maybe don't ever go to Midtown ever because it's not
it's
safe.
real dangerous there.
Not safe. But there's this moment where I think it's Alexi there's like a huge slab wall and it's falling over and it's about to land on a civilian. And Alexi, who is a super soldier, like goes and catches the wall and is holding it up, but he's not strong enough to hold it indefinitely, and he's not strong enough to push it back. And this civilian is just like hanging out and not running.
you gotta run. You gotta jump to the side.
Move. And then I think it's maybe Walker or Bucky, like all the other characters one by one come over and also hold up the wall. And there's no distinction made between who had a super soldier serum injected into them at some point and who didn't. Like, I'm like, what's Yelena gonna do? But it's the only way that they can save this person. And nobody has like a moment of ego in this. They are genuinely cooperating. And when they do flip the wall over, works. And not only does it work, but then all the civilians start applauding.
Yeah, I mean, I like that. I feel like if they wanted to be unsubtle, they could by adding dialogue like "We'll do it together" or "You can lean on me." Right?
Yeah.
That to me is unsubtle. But the visual, I really like what you're describing about the visuals.
I thought it was done very elegantly, and it helps that all of these characters are very sarcastic and like don't really like each other. I mean, they do, they're friends at the end, but like also they don't like each other. And so every time you have a moment where it could be like, we did it thanks to teamwork, they'll just insult each other. And it allows you to have the visual, which is more important in movie language anyway, without it becoming belabored or cheesy because they undercut it with the sarcastic remark.
Right. I think that's true. And I think especially Yelena and Alexi have a few moments of like just genuine emotional connection in ways that I think have really, that both of them have clearly been hungering for in terms of this father-daughter relationship that was severed years ago, in part by the Red Room, but in part by Alexi himself, and then by her rejecting him for understandable reasons and stuff like this. And there was a really beautiful connection there.
Yeah, I thought, like, to me, that was the emotional turning point of the movie. And again, like, in terms of this being Yelena's movie, that is the moment where, like, again, the structure of this movie is very transparent. We they have their low point at the end of Act 2 when they have gotten their asses kicked by Bob. They have totally lost. They have no way to stop him. They don't know what to do. Yelena says extremely cruel things to every single member of the Thunderbolts and walks away from them. And Alexi catches up with her and is like, I'm sorry I wasn't there for you. Like, and like states the pain that they are both in, and they're like both crying, and it's a really nice scene. And it is what gives her the, like, again, you hit the low point at the end of Act 2, and then you have that moment where you rally emotionally so you can go in and fight the bad guy in Act 3, which is exactly what happens because she had that moment with Alexi. She has the emotional fortitude to go into the darkness and try to share what she has just gotten with somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is nice. I like this movie.
There's one more scene that I'm just like dying to talk about, and then I promise I'll stop.
Please, no, please do. I have a big critique I want to bring, but I want to hear more of the positive. So please go ahead.
Okay, so the, you know, in terms of like, toxic masculinity and he just needs a hug and whatever, I do think that the movie actually explicitly rejects that, and I don't think it rejects it with Bob. I think it rejects it with Walker, because Bob has this ability to touch people. This is before he really knows that he has powers, and nobody knows what's going on with him, but he can touch people and he can see those dark memories that they're trying to hide. Like, that's the first time we see the flashback of Yelena as a child luring her friend into a trap. And so he touches Walker. And earlier in the movie, Walker was bragging about how he has the best life out of any of them because he has a wife and a kid, and like his life is complete and they're all losers. So Bob touches him, and we see a flashback of Walker sitting in his house. He's right next to the crib. The baby is screaming, and his wife is like, can you do something? Can you help? Can you, like calling from the other room, John, can you do something? And he's just staring into space, like just totally checked out, ignoring his crying child, ignoring his wife who is begging for help. And she finally walks into the room, picks up the baby, and is like, what is wrong with you? And walks out. And later we learn that she's actually left him, like they're separated.
Right.
And this could be a scene that's like, oh, poor Walker, like his wife is such a bitch. But it's not. This is a memory that's laden with profound shame for him because he is failing as a husband and father, because he is failing in domestic responsibilities. He is not comforting his child, and he is not helping his wife. And the movie has sympathy for him. Like, it's clearly not because he doesn't care. He's clearly depressed. And the movie, I felt like that it managed to have sympathy for his depression without excusing his failure to, again, be reliable in a domestic sphere. And I think that really is saying something against that sort of toxic masculinity idea.
I think that's really fair, and you're right. I hadn't thought of these in terms, but in many ways, it is a very, I think, intentional counterpoint of Alexi, who also failed his child, failed as a father, and now is trying to, in exact opposite to Walker, who's denying that, and is more worried about other people thinking of him as a good father than actually being a good father. Alexi is acknowledging that he was a shitty father, and is trying to do better. As someone who's 2 months away from becoming a parent and had an abusive father, this is all hitting really close to home. And I remember, I was sobbing during that scene because it's one thing actually that they've drilled into us in a couple of the baby classes and books that I've been reading is like, no matter what you do, sometimes your baby's going to cry, and there's literally nothing you can do to stop it, and that you're going to feel like a failure. And I'm sitting here thinking about, for someone like John Walker, who can stop bullets, is so much more powerful than anyone else. The idea that even he sometimes can't stop a baby from crying, and would go into that kind of fugue state and thus stop trying instead of like continuing to show the baby love and affection and doing what you do until it does stop crying on its own for whatever reason or with what you're doing. It hits really hard for sure. Here's So I think you all have talked me out of some of the toxic masculinity stuff that I was seeing it. And I admit, I think I am, it's kind of like some of the conversations we've had in earlier podcasts about barrier gaze or fridging, where the problem with these tropes is that things that kind of look like it or rhyme with the trope, it's easy to see them as the trope and react badly to them as well because of that. And I will admit that for me, I hear what you're saying about Yelena. It did feel like it made Bob's emotional journey the focus, and everyone else have to deal with, to sort of subsume their emotional feelings for Bob's emotional feelings. And I didn't love that, but I agree with you. It's nowhere near as bad as I at first thought it was.
Well, I have a question, if I may, because you described it as a pretty girl gives him a hug, right?
Mm-hmm.
But isn't this a group hug? Is my understanding of the scene?
It starts with just Yelena.
Yeah.
And it's very much a... Go ahead.
But they all hug together.
Yeah, so Bob is, and that was another thing that I thought was really, again, unsubtle, but really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So in the climax, they're in the lab. They're not really in the lab. They're in this like mindscape of Bob's, of the lab where he was turned into Sentry. Mm-hmm. Which is also, it's like ground zero for his issues. And it's also kind of ground zero for Yelena's, because that's where the opening scene of the movie is, where she's monologuing about her depression. And we basically, the Void shows up. Like, we have regular Bob, and then the Void shows up, and he is like using telekinesis to like hurl bits of the lab at the rest of the team. So they're all pinned against the wall. I think Walker maybe has like something stuck through his shoulder. Like, they're pretty injured by it, and they can't move, they can't intervene. And so Bob just is like fighting the Void, and he gets the upper hand, and he's like on top of the Void, punching him over and over and over again. And you can see the blackness of the Void is creeping up over Bob. And I think it's Bucky who's like, this is wrong, which was another point that I really appreciated. Like, the solution is not violence. The violence does not solve the problem in this movie.
Toxic masculinity teaches that, like, if you accept depression, which at first you're not supposed to, but if you do, you can beat it by being strong. You can man up against depression.
Right.
And that, you're right. That scene is a brilliant way of showing how wrong all that is.
It's the solution is not physical strength, or like any kind of like being stronger, and the solution is not hating yourself. And so Bucky is like, this is wrong, and they're all like, oh yeah, like this is clearly not the solution. So Yelena and Alexi are actually pinned beneath the same piece of metal, and she looks at him, and he kind of nods at her, and then he pushes harder against it and takes all of the weight so that she can slip out, which is yet another moment of teamwork.
Right.
So she can run to Bob, and like she's not running to hug him. She's running to pull him off of the Void, which turns into a hug. She's like pinning his arm so he stops doing this. It is also a hug, absolutely. And then the metal kind of loosens its grip, and everybody else can run forward and like jump into the hug too.
I think that even before that, I mean, she gets to him first.
Yes, absolutely.
And that's, to me, it felt like at first the moment was between that. But again, I'm trying to move past that one. But to what I think is because I think, like I said, you've turned me around on that one, but I think there is still one part of it that hit me wrong. And there's a number of great articles about this movie, some that are very praising of it. And I want to be clear, like, the experience that some people have had with this, including myself, of it not ringing true, does not negate the fact that it rings true for many people. And as I said, even for me, many parts did ring true. There's a great article on how the movie is apparently an expression of CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, something I haven't been through, but I know has really saved a lot of lives. But there's an article in Polygon called Thunderbolts' Big Depression Metaphor Hit Me Hard, Mostly for the Wrong Reasons. What Marvel Studios' latest gets right and wrong about living with depression. It's by Tasha Robinson. And she talks about having depression and how this movie hit her. And I just want to read a couple parts of it because it really was effective. And it's talking about all the things that the movie gets right. And says, but it misses one big issue with depression. The aspect of the movie that most made me shrink in my seat in the theater. The sense of shame that comes with needing this kind of help and with putting this much weight and demand on other people. There's a comforting fantasy in the idea that even though everyone in Thunderbolts is navigating major traumas of their own, they're all capable of temporarily setting aside their own issues to focus on comforting and supporting Bob. Granted, they don't have much choice, given that he's encompassing the world in nightmarish darkness. Still, the film frames that group hug as an act of caring and empathy, not desperation or grudging heroic obligation. He has easy ability to absorb that comfort when it comes, though, to take on Yelena's message of companionship as a real fix for his loneliness, and to do it without embarrassment. To me, that felt harder to believe than MCU multiverses are magic and almost toxic itself in its lack of weight or complexity. I've been through this kind of crisis myself, facing my own mental health struggles or trying to help friends navigate theirs. And shame is often a major factor, both as an oncoming part of the larger weight of depression, and in moments like these where long-simmering melancholy reaches a boiling point. It's hard to accept help. It's hard to admit problems. The societal view of depression holds that everyone should be strong, independent, and self-contained, and that it should be embarrassing to demand other people's time, attention, or love. And I'm going to stop reading it because I don't want to kind of let her words speak. But one thing she goes on to talk is that it was really frustrating that at the end, Bob has no memory of this. Because he kind of therefore escapes the sense of like, wait a minute, when everyone else was going through their own stuff, but I kind of like started hurting everyone to the point that they had to stop dealing with their stuff and help me with mine. And for me, that felt very, very real. Of the sense of like, and it's part of the shame spiral and the way, our brains lie to us in depression or other kinds of mental illness, because the reality is your friends are glad to help you. The people in the movie are happy to help Bob. They want to help Bob. They want to help each other. But it just felt like the phrase alone in a crowd is one that I really related to a lot in the midst of my worst depression of like, yes, I had all these friends around me who loved me, who wanted to take care of me, but it didn't help at all. It just continued the shame spiral downwards. And so I think that's the only part of it that I think still continues to ring false to me is, and her article I think is great. And I want to, I'll put it in the show notes, but I want to kind of put it to you all of kind of your perspective on that of the, like this can, and I think for some people, depression is absolutely helped by having lots of people, like people come to them with love and affection and caring, but that sometimes that can actually backfire or that can it doesn't always ring true the way it does in this movie.
I mean, first of all, I want to say, like, you don't need to apologize for not liking this movie as much as I do, because I came onto your podcast. I came into your home many times and said, I don't like Superman 78 or The Dark Knight, and you were still friends with me. So,
that's true.
like,
This is true.
We can disagree, and it's okay. I definitely like I that sounds like a really interesting article, and I'm going to look it up after we're done talking. And I think those are really interesting points. As someone who has also struggled with depression, I would agree that like shame is a huge factor in it, and it's a huge factor that prevents you from being able to turn to others and say, hey, this is what's going on with me, and it's definitely something that I very much struggled with and have historically struggled with, and I do think it is something, again, like shame is a huge emotion in this film. It's right. Something that it hammers home repeatedly. I will say, I don't think it's like the minute the characters are offered a helping hand, they immediately accept it. Like it's a 2-hour movie. And I think that is the journey from being unable to make those connections. Like they don't like each other at the beginning. They can't get along.
Yeah.
That is part of the journey, being able to accept that help and to like that. Yes, they literally lean on each other towards the beginning of the movie, but they cannot emotionally lean on each other until the end. But I also think even right in the movie, they depict multiple experiences of depression and none of them are exactly the same. And I think it's when you're telling a story about something that is so loaded and so personal and so difficult, it's not going to work for everybody. It's not going to work for everybody's experience. And I often find media depictions of depression I very rarely connect with them. I very
Mm-hmm.
rarely see my own experience reflected in them. And I remember, I mean, this was like 10 years ago now, but I remember once reading a review of the Mark Waid run on Daredevil, which is about Daredevil struggling with depression and masking. And somebody was reviewing it and said, like, that's what I do to mask my depression. I smile like a good little extrovert. And like to this day, the phrase good little extrovert like gets the waterworks going for me in a way that, again, you know, the sort of typical depiction of here's this person who can't get out of bed
Right.
doesn't. So I think I don't I don't think this movie can be everything to everyone, and I think it's
That's fair.
very worthwhile to say like this didn't work for me because this is my experience, because that's the only way that we can
Right.
understand each other.
I think that's a really good point, and I think that like we have been focusing more on this movie than I'd planned to, and we've been going for a while, so I don't want to go too much longer, but maybe we can use this to kind of expand out a bit, which is that, you know, earlier in the article they kind of talk about like should a movie like this try and wrestle with something as deep as depression and mental illness, while also having, you know, action scenes and quips and funny jokes and setup of the villain. I would have liked a more believable, or at least in some tiny way relatable villain. We get, I think, someone who twirls a mustache even more so than Emperor Palpatine. Neither one of them have mustaches, but you get my point. But
I think Valentina would rock a mustache.
I think that's very. She would stroke a beard so well.
She'd be
you know?
so good at it.
But I feel like having had this conversation, I feel like I am glad this movie is moving the conversation forward. I may not love the things that it's adding to the conversation, but I feel like it's asking really good questions, even if I don't love the answers that it's proposing. And that's, I don't think I can ask anything more of media. Like, I think that's exactly what we want to see. And a lot of what this podcast is about is saying, how can you have things that have fun action scenes and quippy dialogue and a lot of humor? Though I didn't think this movie was as funny as a lot of other people, but that's putting aside. But like, have all that and still deal with serious issues.
I think part of why this movie is because like most of the reaction I've seen has been like, wow, this is so much better than I expected. Wow, this is like people were surprised. I was surprised. And I think a lot of that is because the MCU has reached a point where a lot of these products that they're creating, and I use the word product deliberately rather than like stories or movies or TV shows, feel like we need to keep the IP going. We need to like put out our requisite number of Marvel products in this year. We made this thing by committee based on who is under contract, and it just here it is. It came out of the sausage factory. And so to see a movie that is about something and is trying to say something, even if the something it's saying doesn't necessarily work for everyone, I think really is a reason for that, like surprise pleasure of, oh, wait, I liked this. I connected with this, which was also how I felt about Agatha All Along, which I thought was like a shameless money grab. Like, we're really doing a TV show about a song from a different TV show. And then it really had something to say, and I found it very moving.
Yeah, that's definitely true. And I will, just kind of as an aside, because Agatha All Along, a lot of it is about motherhood and things like that. I am so glad that Yelena's depression and her shame moment, the shame room, and all of this never had anything to do with the forced hysterectomy that she went in. Oh God,
yes.
Because that was such a painful thing with her and Natasha over a couple different products. So glad to avoid that. Riki, where do you kind of fall on this? Having heard this discussion, what's kind of your thoughts on movies like this that are not meant to be like, 2-hour navel gazing explorations of our deepest, darkest mental demons, but that are wrestling with such hard issues amongst the fight scenes and the quips and the fun stuff?
Yeah, I have a couple of thoughts. I mean, I should have written some of these down. So the first thing is like that the Polygon article and Bob forgetting, right? Forgetting about what he did as the Sentry and the Void is like going back to being true to the comics version of him. And I think part of it is a conceit that you have to depower him until the next crisis, right? It's like the whole Superman problem. It's like if you
Right.
have the Sentry as part of the Avengers, like wouldn't he just solve everything immediately? So I think you have to like depower him and sit him on the bench in this form. So it's like an unfortunate product of like what you have to do with this character like between movies.
Mm-hmm.
There's a
And I
little bit
can
of a
I can
gag about that too at the end when they're like, okay, we got to fight crime. Can you like do something? And he's like, I don't remember how to
Yeah.
anymore, guys. Sorry.
Yeah.
as a product of, as Jessica was saying, like the MCU machine, I think to me, like you look at the names involved in this movie and what they have done previously, it really shows that they put a lot more trust back into the creators. I got their names right here. So Joanna Callow is one of the writers. She's a writer on The Bear, which is just like a multi-Emmy winning show and deals with a lot of, similar issues of like people under pressure and like how they react to that. And then on the other side, Jake Schreier, the director, one of his last projects was Beef, which is a Netflix show. I actually went and watched the first episode just to see what it was like tonally, and it really struck me that Beef is a show where like the two main characters are going through some kind of depressive episode, and it's leading to them acting out in ways that are, not good for them.
Yeah.
And to bring all of that together in a superhero movie is kind of stunning. And
that's fair.
I would not have expected it from the MCU like even a year ago, right?
Yeah.
So it sounds to me like this is the best representation or the best exploration of depression in the MCU, which is a low bar, probably like Iron Man 3, right? Or that was a little bit more PTSD, but similar tone. It's a low bar, but they set the bar further, is what it sounds like. They move the bar.
If we're separating out the Netflix MCU, then yeah, I think I would agree. I would definitely put Daredevil. But anyway, sorry, I interrupted you there.
Yeah, and WandaVision.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. So on the movie side, like this is the best. It's a new bar. That sounds like a good thing to me. And the fact that it is getting accolades just as a movie in general, while accomplishing that, is a positive step forward. And the fact that like it seems like they let the creators like tell the story for the most part that they wanted to tell. And there are elements where they have to set up the next movie and the next movie, obviously, but I'm actually shocked. So, like, I mean, the big spoilery thing about the asterisks is that at the end, they are introduced as the new Avengers by Val, right?
Right.
And I'm shocked that that is the conclusion, just from a franchise standpoint, because they've been setting up, Sam Wilson's supposed to be putting the new Avengers together. They've had teasers about Miss Marvel and Kate Bishop's being the young Avengers. And this just came out of nowhere. It's like, oh, they're the Avengers. And to give these characters that mantle in this moment in the franchise history is kind of stunning to me.
Well,
says something about the trust that they put in these performers, right?
I think that's overstating it somewhat. And I don't want to go too into this. This is a totally different issue. But and Jessica, tell me if you disagree. But to me, it did not in any way, shape, or form feel like the MCU was saying these are the new Avengers.
There's a gag about it at the end. Sam is suing them.
It was saying that that the United States is saying they're the new Avengers, the same way they're saying that John Walker is the new Captain America. Like, I don't think that these are the stars of Avengers Doomsday or whatever it is. But they're probably going to be they're going to be in it for sure, and they're going to be some of the Avengers team. But I think the idea is that in universe, the term Avengers is now being in conflict. Not that the MCU itself is sort of in a meta way saying these characters are the Avengers.
Yeah, although to be fair, who's on Sam's team?
Yeah,
like
that's what I mean. Is like
it's just Sam.
At this point, they are more the Avengers than Sam, Joaquin, Falcon, Shang-Chi, like Captain Marvel. Like she's off planet again, right? And that's how they get rid of her until the next movie. She's always off planet. Like they're not a team. Like this is much more of a team after this movie. than anything else going on.
Well, let's get to that when we get to our next Avengers movie, because I'll be really disappointed, I think, if that's actually what they do. But just going back to the mental illness side of it, I hear what you're saying. I do think, as I think about it, that there's a lot of other movies, even in the MCU, that I think handled depression and mental illness better. I think Black Panther 2 does a lot with it. I think Avengers Endgame, especially in the character of Thor, does an awful lot with it, and with Tony.
Would you say better, though? Because I know there was a lot of unhappiness about particularly Thor and like Chris Hemsworth in a fat suit, like did not.
So for me, as someone, the main way that my depression, I've talked about this before, but the main way that my depression sort of like exerted itself in the outer world was me gaining a lot of weight. And him getting to be heroic without losing the weight was, I thought, incredibly cathartic for that perspective. So yeah, I agree that it's controversial, but I'm just saying that to me, this hasn't set the new bar, but I would say it rises to the bar that a couple of others have hit that a lot do not come close to.
Well, and I think is also a great example of how, like,
different people
we need these multiple
ways.
Depictions, because things are going to hit different for different people with different experiences.
For sure. And I think, to me, that's kind of my biggest takeaway is I feel like this movie tried something. It didn't just be like, this is what you were saying, Jessica. It wasn't just more Hollywood's, it wasn't just another factory produced by the numbers superhero movie that was kind of soulless and had nothing to say. This tried something. Like, I love the TV show The Acolyte. It was trying something totally new in Star Wars. I don't think it was totally successful. I did wind up loving it, though. But I think even if I hadn't, I was really glad that it tried something. And I think that's kind of what I feel about this is I think this was like, let's try something. I think it failed to try it. But I think I'm much happier having it try and, for me, fail, and for a lot of other people succeed, than for them to just give us another soulless, by the numbers kind of thing that has nothing to say and is just an excuse for big shiny things and, the newest actor to be in the tight suit, whatever it is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Speaking of the newest actor in the tight suit, I would be remiss if I did not talk about the fact that originally Stephen Yeun from Beef and The Walking Dead, among other things, he was originally cast to be Sentry. And it was only because of the writer's strike kind of like throwing all the schedules out of sync that he had to drop out of this project because he had other commitments that he had to honor. So I would have loved that. Like, I watched the first episode of Beef and I like saw this Bob character, like the depression and also like parts of the anger like in this, and I was like, yeah, like I could totally have seen him as this role. I've seen some concept art where they give him the blonde hair because that's like a very key part of Sentry, like the power of 1,000 suns or whatever, 1,000,000 maybe. And so like his hair is like golden blonde. I'm like, would I wanted to see Stephen Yeun like with blonde dyed hair? I don't know. Maybe we could change that part, but I would have enjoyed that a lot to see him in this role.
And I will say, I think for me, and I think probably I was letting the context in which I was seeing this movie play too big of a role. Because right now, in the political world and stuff, we are seeing an awful lot of like, but think of the poor straight white cis men. Like, what about their feelings? And they're not getting into Harvard enough. And so that's driving politics. And like, they're being oppressed every time people talk badly about them on social media. And so in that context, for me, asking me to think that all the characters should care about a straight white cis guy, and maybe he's not straight or cis, but that's certainly how he portrayed so far, that his emotional problems should be the thing that everyone has to focus on, it just hit me wrong. And so I would have loved to see that difference, but I think, I'm willing to step back and say that's probably me reading too much of my feelings about the rest of the world onto this movie, because all people's feelings do deserve attention and care and things like that. It doesn't mean that Bob's shouldn't. It's just that to me, it's not the high priority that I think the movie made it.
I do think that, like, as established, we didn't have the same read on the movie, but I do think that if they had cast a non-white actor as Bob, it would have changed some of that subtext for sure.
Very
or
much
even
so.
stuff like, so Riki, you talked about Sentry being blonde. There is actually a gag where Valentina makes Bob dye his hair blonde because that's the look she has in mind for Sentry.
Okay.
And I think, and it's a gag, like it's supposed to be ridiculous that he would do this, that like he feels uncomfortable about it. I think that gag lands very differently if she's making an Asian man dye his hair blonde to look a certain way.
And
like
that may just be an artifact of that original casting.
Yeah, I think
that's interesting.
That would have been really interesting.
Yeah.
The joke felt a little weird. I was like, why is he so bothered by this? And I think, that would have been very interesting with a different casting.
Yeah.
I really want to wrap up, but this actually inspires me to ask a different question. Jessica, and for you, Riki, as well, how do you think it would have affected the movie if they hadn't given us the Bob character? If the movie really was focusing on Yelena's mental health journey and she was the one who became the Void?
That's such a loaded question for me, just because of the comic connection of it. Like, I tolerate changes. I'm not one of those people that's like it has to be exactly like the comics, but Sentry and Void are like inextricably connected. So I guess you would have if they had changed the name.
Oh, I'm saying if they made her both Sentry and Void.
I wouldn't have been able to tolerate that. I guess that's one step too far. Like, I don't know where the lines are, right? But it would be like, what if you made like this other human being who's not Bruce Banner, the Hulk, which again, like comics have done lots of other Hulks and lots of other people, but I'm talking like original the Hulk. It's like, no, then just like make it one of the other characters. Is how I would feel.
It would be like if after Iron Man 2, they gave Tony Stark super soldier serum and they were like, he's also Captain America now. It's like an established character who has this storyline and now he's also going to be this other.
Yeah, it's tough. I know, Matthew, like where you're trying to go with the question, and of like dealing with the gender issue of it all. But ultimately, like these are IPs that they don't have to, but they're
there's a larger narrative that they
it's hard for me to disconnect that.
And this comes out of walking out of the movie theater, I said to my partner who had seen the movie with, why didn't they just make it all about Yelena's emotional journey? Why not have her be the one who gets sort of in her depression, gets talked into this be a hero thing by Val, and then has the crash? And then once I realized that, because having watched it, I had no idea that Void Sentry was a thing. And when coming out of it, I was like, oh, okay, there's this longer thing, so plugging Yelena into it wouldn't quite make sense. But that's kind of where the question came from.
And that's like the MCU of it, right? They have to like get to a certain point within the next X movies of like introducing certain characters that they know they're going to want to have in like the big crossover. So
see, for me, like I don't care about the Sentry at all. Like I've read comics with him, but never like, that's never been my focus in Marvel. So I don't have like, there are plenty of characters who I would be like, no, but that's not how it is in the comics. Like very relatable feelings there, but Sentry is just not one of them for me, and neither is Yelena. That the way this movie is structured, like it would have to be a completely different movie. It would not be like just a case of like that climax is different. Like that, among other things, we'd have to introduce the idea that Yelena has been subjected to intrusive medical experiments, which I don't really want to introduce here.
That's fair.
Or like, you could like, there are other ways you could, if you're totally decoupling the whole narrative of Bob, Sentry, Void, then you can find other ways, some other MacGuffin that triggers her turning into the Void. But for me, I still
go ahead.
I still think it remains her movie the whole way through.
Yeah.
I do not think, I did not watch that movie and feel like it became Bob's movie. Like, among other things, in that climax, we go through 3 different memories of Yelena's that are like horrible, traumatic memories. We glimpse part of Bob's through a crack in the floor. Like we don't we don't get his story because this isn't his story. And
Okay.
to me, there's two halves to Yelena's journey, or to her being able to start healing. And the
Right.
first half of that is Alexi reaching out to her. And the second half of that is her reaching out to someone else. And they are equally important. Like, I think
Yes.
the fact that she chooses to do this is, I don't think it's about him. I think it's about what she needs. And I can see that coming off as like, it's really important for women to be nurturing or something. But that's not the read I had on it. Like, I do think that her deliberately forging that connection is crucial to her character development in her narrative. So
Right.
I do think it would be interesting to see a movie where Yelena becomes a cosmic being. I support her in those journeys, but I don't think it would. I don't know that it would be a worse movie, but I don't personally feel like I need that version.
Okay. No, I think that makes all ton of sense, and this is exactly why I wanted to have this conversation. And I was excited for you to see the movie, and Riki, I'm so glad you were able to bring so much to this conversation. This has really helped me shift my perspective on the movie. Listeners, as always, we want to know what you think. We will still be collecting feedback. Like I said, we're going on hiatus for a while. I'm going to keep recording episodes. In part, what we want to do is have a backlog, because right now, a lot of times when I record an episode, I then have to turn it around in 24 hours, and that's just not possible right now, and it's going to be even more impossible when I'm trying very hard not to be the father, John Walker. So, so we will be keep getting feedback. Let us know what you think. All the information is in the show notes. Riki, Jessica, thank you both so much for being a part of this. To our listeners, thank you so much. We have